Have you ever heard of the Bowls of Joy roller coaster from 1915? Chances are you haven't. This coaster is rarely discussed in enthusiast circles, and documentation of it is incredibly rare. This is a shame, as it's perhaps the most influential and ambitious coaster you've never heard of. Unfortunately, it's also perhaps the most disastrous coaster you've never heard of. Its less than 1 year run at the Panama Pacific International Exposition was marred by technical issues, delays, and even death. But what was the story behind this nearly forgotten coaster? Let's talk about the tragedy of Bowls of Joy right here on Theme Park Crazy. This video was made possible by Reddit user Waifive, who made an incredibly researched post on the coaster a few years ago. I'll link it in the description. Now right off the bat, I know what some of you might be thinking. Doesn't Bowls of Joy sound like a cereal slogan? Well, no it's not. But speaking of cereal, I want to give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Magic Spoon. You may already know about Magic Spoon for their fueling high-protein cereals with the tastes and flavors you remember from your childhood. But Magic Spoon has more than that because they've got some scrumptious treats as well. These come in 4 different flavors: chocolate peanut butter, marshmallow, double chocolate, and blueberry muffin. These bars are just awesome, with 11 to 12 grams of protein, 1 gram of sugar, and 1 to 3 grams of net carbs. You get all the wholesome fuel you need on the go. And my personal favorite, this blueberry muffin flavor. As someone who's watching a sugar intake but loves something sweet, these are perfect. Plus, Magic Spoon now has a new line of protein granola. This granola has 13 to 14 grams of protein and 0 added sugar. It comes in flavors like honey almond, this peanut butter flavor, or I use this mixed berry flavor to make an awesome parfait. And aside from parfaits, you could just use it to snack on. If you're interested in trying out Magic Spoon treats and granola, use my promo code CRAZY or click the link in the description. You'll get $5 off your order. And you can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or your nearest grocery store. And on top of everything, Magic Spoon offers a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like their product for any reason, they'll refund your money with no questions asked. Start off spring with a bang and get yourself some Magic Spoon today. Special thanks to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. Now let's turn the clock back all the way to 1906 in Kansas City, Missouri. That year, post office clerk Horace A. Lockwood was watching a relay bicycle race at the city's convention hall. Like modern indoor bicycle races, the track was banked and saucer-shaped. As he watched the bicycles navigate the track at high speeds, Lockwood had a moment of inspiration. As described by the Kansas City Star, thousands of persons came to see the exhibitions. Among them, Mr. Lockwood, who wondered why, if persons were so anxious to see others make these perilous loops, they would be anxious to make them themselves in perfect safety. Lockwood figured the perfect way to allow people to replicate this thrilling experience themselves was with a newfangled amusement ride. On January 24, 1907, Lockwood filed a patent for his new ride concept. A new roller coaster, formerly labeled as a pleasure railway, a more common term for coasters at the time. This patent showed a ride unlike anything seen before. And now, fellow viewers, I present an amazing exclusive animation of the attraction made by the incredible Nicolas Salenc. This animation will use all available details from the finished ride and the patents to bring it to life. So big shout out to Nicolas, and I'll link his pages in the description below as well. This coaster concept consisted of 2 massive wooden bowls, each featuring a spiral banked track section. The amount of banking alone was just one major innovation. The main idea was simple. Passengers would board a car at the bottom of the first bowl, where a rotating propeller would gradually push them up the spiral track. The modern-day equivalent of this lift would be something like the one on the Volare model by Italian manufacturer Zamperla. Here, the lift mechanism also pushes the vehicles up a spiral section of track. On the other hand, while the vehicles on the Volare's lift maintain a constant speed, the laws of physics would actually cause these vehicles to accelerate as they went uphill. At the start, the car moved in a tight, narrow circle, requiring less speed to maintain motion. But as the spiral extended, the car had to travel a greater distance per revolution. In other words, to complete each loop in the same amount of time, it had to go faster. Since the propeller arm pushing the car provided a constant acceleration, this effect compounded over time. By the time the car reached the top of the bowl, it had accelerated to 30 miles per hour, a tenfold increase from where it started. This arguably made Bowls of Joy the earliest example of a launched roller coaster using mechanical force to build speed. This was decades before Aero Development's electric winch system, or Schwarzkopf's weight drop or flywheel systems. Indeed, this may be the most influential, widely forgotten roller coaster in history. Once riders reached the top, an impressive 30 feet in the air, the car would shoot across a bridge to the second bowl, where it would spiral down, supposedly reaching speeds of 40 miles per hour. It's worth noting that the original patent had several features that wouldn't be carried over into the finished prototype. For one thing, in the patent, a large curved plate is attached to the back of the vehicle for the propeller to make contact with. More notably was the presence of upstop wheels. Although the introduction of upstop wheels is often attributed to Jackrabbit at New York Seabreeze Amusement Park, Lockwood actually thought of the concept first, saying in his patent, quote, "On the inner sides of the vertical arms of the U-bar are rotatively mounted friction rollers disposed below the support, normally out of contact therewith. These rollers prevent the car from leaving the track." The rollers didn't end up on the final attraction, but if they did, Lockwood would have beaten coaster legend John A. Miller to the punch by almost a decade. Over the next few years, Lockwood would work rigorously on his concept. Soon enough, word of his invention began to spread. Lockwood's fellow post office employees, as well as other Kansas City residents, invested financially in the development of this invention. Later on in 1913, Lockwood filed a new patent for a revised version of the concept. The basic concept of two spiraling bowls of track was kept the same, but there were still crucial differences. For one thing, the boom system would now have a double-sided propeller in order to increase capacity. This allowed more cars to be sent up the first bowl at once, and 6 cars to operate on the ride at the same time. Additionally, the large plate on the back was replaced with an upstanding bar, which looked much less clunky. Moreover, a shock absorption spring system was added in order to prevent painful collisions. This kept passengers from getting hurt and the vehicles from being damaged. All in all, this new version of the concept promised an improved ride experience and a novel attraction for whatever park invested in it. Confident in his invention, Lockwood began pitching it to amusement park owners. One of those owners was Michael G. Heim, who operated Kansas City's Electric Park. Originally built to promote Heim's family brewery, this bustling amusement park had become a major attraction in the city, attracting 1 million visitors in 1911. For the 1913 season, Heim was looking to go big and add several new attractions to the park's lineup. In the winter of 1912, Heim reportedly had thousands of rides pitched to him. So when Lockwood went up to bat, it seemed like his idea would get lost in the fray. The Kansas City Star said of Lockwood's pitch, quote, "When he offered it to M.G. Heim last winter, Mr. Heim at first yawned warily. As soon as Mr. Lockwood began to explain, he sat up and took notice." Soon enough, it was official. Lockwood had sold one of his newfangled pleasure railways, and its name was Bowls of Joy. He was noted as saying he hoped one would be installed in every major American amusement park. Heim excitedly promoted the attraction alongside other new additions like the new Ben-Hur racing coaster. He was quoted as saying, "In the amusement features, I believe I can say without fear of contradiction that Electric Park is today the most complete amusement park in America. Among the new features are Bowls of Joy, the first in the world and invented by a Kansas City man. At a cost of $15,000, or about $500,000 in today's money, the coaster was built at the park in a matter of months. Notably, much of this money was pulled from the savings of Kansas City postal workers, who wanted to see Lockwood's idea succeed. Meanwhile, Heim had such faith in the coaster that it was given prime real estate, right in the center of the park's grand court. Indeed, the Bowls of Joy was poised to be a spectacle, something that would draw in guests and wow them with its innovative design. But much like Heim's beer company, trouble was brewing as opening day approached. Originally meant to open in the spring of 1913, the ride faced issues right off the bat. Around the time of the park's opening, many of the postal workers who invested in the ride were given a preview of the coaster. As the Star described it, there was too much thrill even for the stockholders. The thing trembled terrifically. As a result, the ride was shut down, and guests on opening day were met with a coaster that was not in operation. Lockwood, as well as park management, immediately got to work on the attraction. Soon enough, it was discovered that the foundation of the propeller system lacked stability. Attempts to fix the system failed, causing officials to order an entirely new, more bulky steel propeller. Meanwhile, the media mocked the perceived failure of the ride, with the Star saying, quote, "Bowls of Joy is the name of the device, but for the postal clerks who put their money into the contrivance, Bowls of Deferred Hope might be more appropriate." Though it did eventually reopen, the ride would continue to have operational issues throughout the rest of the season. Even worse, there would even be 2 reported injuries on the coaster. In May, passenger Richard J. Costello claimed his leg and back were injured when a ride vehicle collided with the car he was sitting in. The second wasn't the ride's fault. In July, a man named John F. Despain stood up on the ride before it ended and fell out, injuring his scalp. Misfortune seemed to follow the ride, as a tragic incident happened right underneath it the same month. One day, a woman poisoned herself while sitting underneath the ride by drinking carbolic acid. She was reportedly the wife of a chauffeur who was driving on the park's racetrack. The couple had separated just days before. This had nothing to do with the ride itself, but it seemed like nothing good was ever associated with it. In spite of the negative press associated with the ride, Lockwood would soon get a chance at redemption. In 1914, it was reported that an all-new version of the ride would open in San Francisco, California. More specifically, the ride would be installed at a World's Fair known as the Panama Pacific International Exposition. This fair was held to celebrate the completion of the Panama Canal. The fair was also meant to showcase the city's recovery and reconstruction after the devastating 1906 earthquake. The fair featured a number of exhibits, and it would also feature an amusement area known as the Joy Zone. One of the biggest attractions of the new zone would indeed be the Bowls of Joy. The new ride would be given a grand entrance, with 2 massive trumpet players sitting in bowls of their own. In hindsight, many of the photos of this entrance have a somewhat foreboding look, perhaps an omen of how this ride's run at the fair would be. For the fair, there were actually a few changes made to the attraction compared to the Kansas City version. The machinery in general was made to be much heavier and more sturdy. In addition, the ascending bowl was made to be larger. On the fair's map, you can actually see how much bigger it is compared to the descending bowl. The fair opened to the public on March 2nd, 1915, and along with it, the Bowls of Joy was heavily advertised. There was even a parade float for it. Not much is known about the first few weeks of its operation, but guest reception was apparently favorable. In a letter to the Oakland Tribune, park guest Bertrand Lewis said, "I hope everyone may derive as much pleasure as I did in the whirls of the Bowls of Joy and the thrilling scenic railway." That said, more improvements were soon needed, and a newspaper ad touted new machinery was being added. Aviator Art Smith even praised it as being, quote, "the greatest ride of its kind I ever had." Sadly, the goodwill wouldn't last, and tragedy would strike the ride in mid-April. On April 14th, military veteran Oscar Stewart fell from the ride. He was said to be occupying the ride vehicle by himself and was thrown 15 feet. According to the Santa Cruz Evening News, Stewart attempted to exit the vehicle while it was still in motion and was dragged 10 feet. Stewart received a fractured skull, a broken arm, and various lacerations. Sadly, he would later succumb to his injuries the next day. Despite the accident reportedly being the guest's fault, even more changes were made to the ride, including the removal of an unspecified element known as the kick. Based on what we can infer from old articles, the kick was most likely the exit of the descending bowl. Naturally, having your tightest turn being at the bottom of a speeding descent does give quite a few lateral forces. What we do know is that the changes resulted in the descending bowl being adjusted and enlarged, costing thousands of dollars. The removal of the kick was humorously reported on in the San Francisco Bulletin on June 1st, but another tragedy would strike the very next day. On June 2nd, Ernest M. Purcell of Portland, Oregon also fell from the ride. In this case, he died instantly when he was crushed and dragged by a ride vehicle. This likely meant he fell out during one of the spirals and was killed by another vehicle passing by. After this second death, the ride was closed down. Officials ordered new safety devices to be added before it could reopen. The Oakland Tribune suggested that the ride should be shut down, saying, Why it should not be closed altogether is something for exposition officials to explain. Meanwhile, the Sunday Oregonian also named the ride the Bowels of Death. Eventually, the ride would reopen with even more changes made to it. According to the Oakland Inquirer, quote, "The Bowls of Joy concession on this zone has now been made foolproof by the erection of steel and wire guards to the cars, preventing persons from thrusting out their arms or falling out when standing." The article also described how management believed that nobody could get hurt even if they tried to stand up. It went on to say that the ride was opened and doing, quote, "a rush of business." Despite these changes, though, it wouldn't be long before yet another incident occurred. Though thankfully, this one was much less serious. According to the July 1st edition of the Capitol Journal, Oregon State Treasurer Thomas B. Kay stuck his arm outside of the vehicle while the ride was in motion. This caused it to get entangled in the machinery, most likely the lift system, and stop the whole ride. This sounds terrifying, but the injuries were said to be not too serious, with just a scrape on his arm. Despite the incidents mostly being caused by passenger error, the ride developed a reputation for being dangerous, though it did still draw interest. An example of how this perception caught on was in a short story published in the San Francisco Bulletin. In it, a student plays hooky and ends up running into his parents at the fair. After talking his way out of getting punished, he remarks, "I went in the Bowls of Joy, mother, and it ain't dangerous." Not much was heard of the ride since then, and it did end up closing with the fair on December 4th, 1915. In the end, the coaster's run at the fair was largely considered to be a failure. Despite earlier reports of doing good business, the coaster was said to make only around $29,000. And was one of the lowest grossing concessions there. This was most likely due to its excessive downtime and multiple modifications. According to Waifive, given the 25% concession fee and additional exposition bonus of $5,250, long downtime, modification costs, and lawsuits, it's very unlikely it broke even. At the end of the fair, the ride was far from the rousing success Lockwood hoped it would be. Worst of all, he would die just weeks after the ride's closure, succumbing to blood poisoning after picking a mark on his face. Though another source says the sepsis was caused from a cut on his face being infected by ink. Lockwood, who was not married, left his $3,000 estate to his mother, worth about $87,000 in today's money. Meanwhile, his 4 brothers and sisters were left with just $1 each. Lockwood's untimely death at just 37 years old meant he never got a chance to refine his ideas or see his innovations influence the amusement industry. Since then, Bowls of Joy has practically faded into obscurity due to its sporadic operations, the lack of access to cameras, and the short lifespan. Not many remember or are even aware of this ride's existence. That said, it was undoubtedly ahead of its time. The coaster pioneered features that would later become industry standards. An arguable launch system, heavy track banking, and even the early concept for upstop wheels in the original patent. Lockwood's dream of a revolutionary amusement ride was bold and ambitious, but ultimately, it was doomed by mechanical flaws, poor financial returns, and tragic incidents. Still, you have to give him credit for some truly astounding innovations. It may not be the most discussed historic coaster of all time, but it certainly deserves to be one of them. Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my previous video and read them out. These comments come from my video on the old Snow White's Adventures dark ride. Jess Skelly says, "Tearing down Snow White's Adventures was a massive loss. It was the best dark ride of all time. I was 5 when I experienced it just 2 years before they revamped. And a couple times after. My wish would be to have Magic Kingdom exactly the way Walt made it. I really thank you for this video." Well, you're very welcome, Skelly. Mistia91 says, "Now let's talk about Universal's scariest dark ride, the Cat in the Hat." Coraline15 says, "I was on the Frozen ride when I went to Florida with my cousin, and I'm so glad we did it because it was an extreme relief to get out of the Florida heat." JF Gibson73 says, "So, any chance you can share that garlic bread recipe? Maybe." And Skipatronic says, "The Disney World one unlocked a core memory." If you want to see your words in my next video, leave a comment down below and it may be selected. Please note though that inflammatory or spam comments will not be read. And if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so once again at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.